Hallo und herzlich willkommen zu einem neuen Modellbau Spezial oder Modellbau König Spezial besser gesagt. Und zwar haben wir keine Kosten und Mühen gespart, beim diesjährigen Sommerfest David Parker einmal über die Schulter zu schauen und ihm beim Erstellen von Zimmerit, egal jetzt an welchem Maßstab, 1:16 oder 1:35, das einmal bildlich festzuhalten. Ja, das Zimmerit stellt er mit Putty her und ich würde einfach sagen, wir werfen ihm mal einen Blick über die Schultern, was er da so anstellt.
Well, good morning, everybody. I'm delighted to be here to talk to you today, and I must apologise for my complete lack of any German, so I will try to speak a bit slower, but if you don't catch something I've said or you don't understand, please just shout out and I'll try and do it a bit simpler. So, what I'd like to do for the first of my talks is just cover some very simple techniques for applying Zimmerit. It's something that you can do quite easily with a little bit of practice, and it means with all these new Panther kits and King Tigers, you can add your own Zimmerit, and it opens up a whole range of possibilities for what you can do. And I think you'll agree, once I've shown you, it's quite a simple technique. So to do this, I'm using this 2-part putty called Magic Sculpt. It's fairly easy to get hold of. You can use other putties. The reason I choose this one is just when it's mixed, it's quite a nice soft putty, so it means it's easy to spread, and it's just my preference, and it's not too messy to work with as well. So I'm just mixing equal parts of the putties together. And I brought this spare turret to demonstrate on. And I've just put some red primer on there, just to make it easy to see what I'm doing. It's not something you need to do if you were doing it yourself. It's purely just for visibility. Okay, so that's fairly well mixed. So I'm just going to start by smearing a big lump of it on the turret.
Excuse me, you don't roughen the plastic before?
No. Then I use this is a kebab skewer, because they're cheap, and I've just put a slight bevel on the end, and this is what I use with a bit of water just to spread the putty out. I'm just using a little bit of water to help it help it spread. But you don't want to get it too wet, it just becomes a bit of a mess.
Ja, das war mein erster Gedanke.
I'm just going to, I've got it roughly applied, and I'm just going to put a bit of water across it all, and then use the same tool just to smooth over the whole surface.
How long it takes to getting hard?
It starts to harden, or noticeably harden, probably about an hour, but it depends on the room temperature, and you can speed it up by heating it with a hairdryer. But you've certainly got enough time to do a whole side or the side of a turret. Okay, so you can see that's roughly covered, and now I'm going to use just a flat blade. You could use a scalpel blade. I've just used this because I have it and it's convenient. So I'm just going to run that now over the putty, and it just evens it and thins it. As I'm doing so, it's lifting off any excess. Okay, that's where we've got to. So it's a reasonably thin layer. You don't have to be too concerned that it's ultra thin, because the next stage will lift any excess away as you do it. And also don't worry about any messy edges or bits that are overlapping places you don't want it to go, because we'll clean them up later, so that's not a problem. So the next stage we're gonna apply some pattern to that, and I'm going to start with the sort of fairly standard ridged pattern that you see on so many of the vehicles. And what I use to make that pattern with is just a little bit of plastic card. I've cut that down, and then I've just softened the edges so they're a little bit rounded, so it's not too sort of squared off. That's a 16 scale version that I use, so it's just bigger proportions and slightly thicker, but it just shows you the same tool. So for this stage you want plenty of water, because otherwise the tool will start to stick and it will just rip the putty back off the surface. So keep the tool wet, and I'll just show you here with this slightly bigger tool. The motion is you press in and then lift away. It's sticking. You press in, lift back, press in again. So it's a sort of motion. I wouldn't normally start in the middle. I'd usually start at one end or the other. You can see as I come down the row, it picks up any excess, and you have to just clean the end of the tool between each row. I'll do another one here. These are just a couple of rows, just to demonstrate. Is that showing up on the camera? Mm-hmm. Okay, so it's quite easy to tidy those up as well. We can just scrape away. And it's as simple as that, really, for that pattern. absolutely straightforward. Maybe just needs a little bit of practice first before you dive into the actual model, but it's and that pattern runs across so many different vehicles, but it's basically the same technique every time. Okay, so now we'll have a little look at some of the Panther patterns, which are a little bit more complicated. We have different companies manufacturing the Panther, and as a result they had different ways of applying their Zimmerit and different patterns. The two examples I've got with me today are both MAN patterns, where we've got like a rollered vertical pattern, a bit like this, then with a grid over the top. So we'll have a look at that one first, I think. Now you can get the initial effect with just a little saw-toothed comb, or you could use one of these photo-etched Zimmerit combs. But I don't think you get the most realistic finish if you use those. I would prefer to use a little roller, and it's very easy to use as well. This is one produced by Great Wall, I think, or Lion Roar, one of those Chinese companies. So we'll just do a little section of this. So again, you want the tool wet, and you want the surface wet as well. So that's put the basic vertical line pattern onto the surface. Very simple, it's quite quick to do, quite easy, as long as you keep the tool wet. And this one comes with a little section on the bottom, so if you've got any tight areas that you can't get the wheel into, you can just go in with that and pick them up. Now to add the grid on top of it, there's a few ways you can do it. I used to make my own little tools like this, which you can see how old they are by the fact they've all gone yellow. But it's a little bit of plastic card just sandwiched between two thicker pieces to stop it flexing. But these days I tend to just use just a bit of photo etch fret. So you can, if you're not confident with the lines, you could just use the straight edge of the photo etch to add the grid on, but you get quite a mechanical looking effect if you do that. So I tend to prefer just to draw it on. Okay. So that's one set of horizontal lines. And now we'll put the vertical ones on. So you get that slight random hand-made appearance. If you make a mistake and you're not happy with what you've done, it's quite easy just to go over it again with the roller, and then you can reapply these. So it's not a big problem if you do slip or something that's not quite how you want it to be. Okay, so that's the MAN pattern. The next one we'll look at will be the MNH one, which is again a grid but over a textured surface. So what I do for that is I'm going to use some quite firm sponge to texture the surface to begin with. This is from a DIY sanding block, so I've just torn it up just to get the sponge from the middle. So again, bit of water on the surface. I'm also going to use a stiff brush to texture it a little bit. Okay. And then I'm going to add the grid again. It's the same process as before. And that's that pattern. Quite simple. And the last one I'm just going to look at today is the early Panther pattern, which is the very fine grid. And in order to do that, I've made a little tool. I made this 20 years ago, I think. So it's just some scrap plastic, and I've just glued some fine plastic rod in rows across it, but I've left a little bit over the edge at each end. That's so I can match the pattern when I'm moving across. So this is a similar effect because there's a stippled texture on the real pattern. And then I'm just going to use my tool. A couple of low bits there where it hasn't picked up, but that's the first impression. And then turn it 90 degrees. And then you've got the fine grid. Now, if I'd taken a bit more care with applying the putty in the first place, so there weren't those little low patches, it would have caught right across them. You'll find this will start to harden as you know. It's still quite workable, but within about 20 minutes, that'll start to harden up. So then I just go around with a knife and just clean off any. It's a lot easier to clean off as it cures, and at that point you can also then create any areas of damage, like on the front there. It's a good time just to sort of get a knife under it and lift bits off. Because once it's fully cured, it's quite tough to get it to lift off again. But that midpoint is the sweet spot for making those changes. Well, that's about it, ladies and gentlemen. Anybody got any questions or things they want me to show again? Or
Pardon?
oh.
You work with the same method in difficult areas. Sometimes it's easier.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
behind the wheels. Panther or here, Panther comes here.
Yeah.
This area.
Yeah, I would try and put the Zimmerit on before you've put any detail on. So if I was doing this one, I would put the Zimmerit on, or a 35th scale version, and then maybe while it was still wet, I'd offer up the suspension components, so I'd get an outline of where they pushed into the putty. Then I could clean those bits off, so that they'll fit properly when I need them to. It's obviously a lot easier to apply the putty when you've just got minimal detail on there. The more things you put on, the more difficult it is. Items like the stowage bins, I would do them separately. So I'd apply the Zimmerit before I fix them to the model. I would do the same with the rear plate on a Panther, just because getting into those sides is difficult. Other tricky bits are the mantlets, because you've got those curves going on all the time. You have to be careful when you're applying when you're applying the grid over the top, you almost have to kind of roll it round. But obviously it was never a perfect pattern originally. They were all just done by hand, so you can have a few sort of irregular patterns, and what I would also do sometimes is, like before I did any of I would mark, either maybe score with a scalpel or mark with a pencil where the tool racks go. Then I would apply the putty, do the pattern. It's a real mess at that point. We've got putty where I don't want it to be, overlapping the racks. So then once it cures and hardens a bit, then I'll clean back to the pencil marks and things, and then I can test fit the racks in, make sure they're all fitting. So it's almost, if you're going to do Zimmerit, it's almost one of the first things you need to do to the model before moving on with anything else. Otherwise, you just make things very difficult for yourself. What's auftragen?
One question. You have here, I've never seen this on a king tiger. You have a photo of this? Huh?
I know of at least two examples. I might have a photo on my phone I can show you of this one. But it was quite well photographed, and you can clearly see the concrete. And there's that other vehicle that was captured by the Americans, where they hung the big stars on the front. That also has that concrete around the cupola. Yeah. But they were different units, so it wasn't a. I don't think it was specific to one unit. It was just individual vehicles by the look of it.
Ich hoffe, ihr seid jetzt genauso sehr geflasht wie ich und habt gesehen, wie der meisterhafte David das jetzt gemacht hat an den 4 Türmen. Ist ja wirklich mit relativ einfachen, simpel selber herzustellenden Werkzeug zu produzieren. Uns freut es natürlich, wenn es euch gefallen hat. Wir freuen uns wie immer über Kommentare, Lob, Kritik, wie auch immer, und Daumen nach oben. Und ich bedanke mich bei euch für eure Aufmerksamkeit und wir sehen uns beim nächsten Mal. Bis dahin, macht's gut.